So, welcome, guys, to yet another episode of Parvez's Trade. My name is Parvez Khan, and I will talk to you about global economics, how to make money from it, what the future looks like. And yeah, in the last episode, we talked about USA, Trump's election, and how US leadership around the world will change given that Trump came in power. And today, I want to talk about something interesting and something not outside North America, and that is European Union. Equally important as a whole, European Union's combined GDP is close to USA's, so it's important. It's an important union. I just want to talk about what the future looks like for the euro currency, for European Union in general, whether the union will last or it will dissolve in the next few years, and yeah, how you can position your bets in the financial markets. So, for those of you who don't know who I am, I have a background in trading. I worked as a professional trader, energy trader in Canada, and I've done trading on my own as well. I have a background in engineering. So, I've been following global politics from a young age because for any good trader out there, you know that the big money in trading is not made by doing statistical analysis, probability analysis. The big money in trading is made by predicting global events before they happen. And so the most of the money I made in trading as a profession on my own, I made it through predicting global events. And that's why I think it's important to understand the fundamentals of global issues and how you should not just listen to the news as they tell you, and you should try to understand the nitty gritty, the fundamentals, details of what's going on and what the future looks like. So, yeah, I'll give my predictions in this video. You can watch it, come back to it in the future and see if I'm right or wrong. I'm pretty sure I'll be right, but yeah, let's get to it. So, first of all, European Union. For those of you who don't know, let me just give you some context. And so, the European Union was created right after the Second World War as a way to basically stop European countries from fighting each other and to create a union that can have a bargaining power as a whole against USA's dominance, Soviet Union's dominance. And so it started with mostly Western European countries, France, Spain, Germany. And then in the last few decades, the Eastern European countries joined, Baltic states, and then the southern Eastern states like Romania, Lithuania, Bulgaria, they joined recently in the last few decades. And when people think about the European Union, this is very important because the Western European states have a very different economic balance sheet than the Eastern European countries. And by what that I mean, not just economic, they're fundamentally different in many ways. So Western economies are very liberalized. They are very progressive in their ideology. The economies are much more mature, much more developed. But downsides of the Western European countries are that they have lower fertility rates than Eastern European countries. Because the economies are matured, there's not much growth remaining. So their economies are very stagnant, the Western European countries' economies. And because they're very progressive ideology, the Western European countries are more inclined and more in favor of mass immigration into Europe because of their progressive ideology. And also the export distribution, the kind of products that the Western Europe exports is vastly different than Eastern Europe. So in Western Europe, you have them exporting products like luxury goods, advanced equipments, and Eastern Europe. And so the Western Europe, they're exporting these luxury goods and advanced equipments and fancy cars, mainly to rich people around the world, mainly USA. Eastern European countries, their economies are not so mature. They're exporting mostly raw goods like agricultural products. So Eastern European countries are more dependent on exporting to price sensitive countries like Asia because they're exporting raw products. And yeah, so that's one of the fundamental difference. And so when people think about whether the European Union will last in the future or whether it will dissolve, this is a one of the fundamental issue. So given that Trump came into power, Western Europe is going to be more sensitive to any tariff from Trump because America buys all these luxurious and high-end equipments and goods from Western Europe. So any tariff from Trump on Europe will be hammering Western European countries more than Eastern European countries. And that means that Western European countries are more focused on America rather than China. Eastern European countries, given that they were part of the Soviet Union, given they're exporting mostly raw materials that Asia consumes, so they are more dependent on China's opinion and the opinion of the global South and the global East. So they are more inclined towards Asia. And this reflects in how the Eastern European countries talk about China versus USA. And you'll see countries like Hungary, they're very pro China. China is opening a BYD plant in Hungary. And so one of the fundamental issue, the one of the fundamental problem in European Union is that you have what's called equalization payments. So the richer European Union countries basically help give aids to the poorer European Union countries. So basically, Eastern European countries are financed by Western European countries just because the Eastern European countries are poorer than Western European countries. That's one thing. And the second thing is because the fertility rates are much lower in Western Europe than they are in Eastern Europe, what you have been seeing is a migration from east to the west in Europe, right? More people in Eastern Europe, they don't need immigrants as much from outside Europe. And you have all these Eastern Europeans migrating for economic purposes to Western Europe. And when it comes to growth, that's where a fundamental issue comes in because Eastern European countries have a higher growth rate than Western European countries. So if you look at the bond markets, Eastern European countries' bonds will have higher interest rates than Western European countries' bonds. Because when you have a stagnating economy, a matured economy, you want to stimulate the economy. And you do that by QE, by quantitative easing. And you basically drop the interest rates. And so Western European countries have a lower interest rates in their bonds. And Eastern European countries, because they're growing so fastly, they're more sensitive to inflation. So they have to keep the interest rates high on their bonds to keep up with inflation. And so this is also a fundamental difference. So if you're let's say a banker or a trader, okay, as we were saying, so when you have this kind of uh, gradient in interest rates between Western European countries and Eastern European countries, if you're a bond trader in Europe, okay, not just a bond trader, you just have money you want to invest. Will you buy bonds in Western European countries at low interest rates, or will you buy bonds of Eastern European countries at high interest rates? It's pretty obvious, right? So you have a bunch of Western European countries, they're offering bonds at low interest rate, and then you have a bunch of Eastern European countries offering bonds at high interest rates. Money will be flowing into the Eastern European countries' bonds. And the problem with that is Western European countries are also funding through aid programs of the European Union through financial assistance. They're basically funding Eastern European countries' growth. And Eastern European countries are getting more investment into their bonds because of high interest rates. So money is basically flowing from Western European countries into Eastern European countries. I think that was one of the fundamental reasons why UK decided to leave European Union because people like Nigel Farage they realized very early on that this is a financial gimmick, this is a political gimmick. The Western European countries, their population is not growing, they have a low fertility rate, and they're bringing in all these economic migrants from outside Europe who don't follow their culture, and their economies are stagnating because it's very mature. There's not much room for growth, and on top of that, the Western European countries are basically funding the growth of Eastern European countries just because of these differential balance sheets, economic balance sheets. And obviously, this is not going to last for long. If anyone, any historian will tell you, in any union of any kind, when a certain uh, groups of people are funding certain other groups of people and they have such different philosophies and ideology, there will be a break, there will be a divide. And so I think when people think about Europe, they're talking about the war between Russia and Europe. And I think that's not the fundamental problem. I think the problem is the dissolving, the breakup between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And I think that's also one of the fundamental reasons why European Union leaders from Western Europe are very against Russia. Because if you have a common enemy that's outside the European Union, it's easy for you to stay together and fight against that common enemy, which is Russia in this case, right? And so I think that's why the Western European progressive leaders like Macron and then Scholz in Germany, I think they are very against Russia and pro Ukraine because it's a cause to unite the European Union countries together and keep the European Union together because these progressive leaders with a global agenda, they benefit from European Union sticking together and they actually benefit from stimulating their voting base by fighting against Russia. Okay, when you have a common enemy, Russia in this case, your voting base is not worried about your country, like France or Germany, giving financial money into Eastern European countries, whether it's military aid, or financial aid, or just the money flowing into the bond market of Eastern European countries. And yeah, you're more occupied with the common thread, which is Russia. So I think smart, especially conservative right-wing parties in Western Europe have figured this out. And that's why you'll see that, country people like Marine Le Pen in France and other right-wing parties in Europe, Western Europe, they're very popular. Whether you go to Netherlands, whether you go to France, Germany, Spain, the right-wing parties are surging in the polls. And the fundamental reason is because people figured out, we're basically funding the lifestyle and the economic growth of the Eastern European countries. And our leaders are basically using Russia as an excuse to continue this funding. And so I think the future of Europe looks very bleak, especially as European Union, and especially as more right-wing parties come to power in European Union, in the actual uh, country's elections on a country level nationwide. You'll see Marine Le Pen and other right-wing fringe parties coming to power in Western Europe, and they'll basically take their countries out of European Union. So if you have a major economy like France, Germany, or Spain leaving European Union, that's a big deal. When UK left the European Union, the Eastern European countries lost a lot of money. Okay? That was a lot of money lost. Uh, and so when one of these major economies of Western Europe, like France, Germany, when they shift right in their political views, these political leaders from the right will basically leave European Union. And I don't blame them. And so when that will happen, European Union will basically dissolve because the Eastern European countries will not want to form a union where they cannot, uh, siphon money off the rich Western European countries, which are no longer there. And so I'm very confident that the European Union will dissolve in the near term future. And more, my prediction is once the Russia's war on Ukraine comes to a ceasefire, that's when it will happen. Because then Russia is no longer the common enemy. And then you have these Western European far right fringe parties coming to power. And then that they'll have a they'll be in a good position to take their countries out of the European Union. I think that's when it will happen. And so I think the breakup of the European Union it will benefit individual countries, France, Spain, and Germany. They don't have to pay all these equalization payments to Eastern Europe. It'll benefit them financially, but on a bigger level, it, for anyone that has traveled in Europe, you know that being part of the European Union comes with perks, right? There's no border custom issues. You can just travel your way, crisscross your way through the entire Europe, and that comes with economic benefits. It's easier to find custom, highly skilled migrants because you have a bigger pool of people to choose from. And the moment you bring in those hard national borders by leaving the European Union, your labor force shrinks, and so your GDP growth will shrink even further. And we saw that happened to UK. The moment they left European Union, they placed those hard borders on their nation, and their labor force shrank. They have a smaller labor pool to choose from for their work, and so the number of skilled people they had shrank, and so their GDP shrank because GDP is basically a measure of the productivity. If you have less skilled people to choose from, you'll more likely choose people that are less productive, and so your productivity will drop even further. And that's what we've been seeing happening in UK. Under the Tories, then now the Labour is in power, the productivity has dropped significantly. And one of the reasons is because the labor pool of people has shrank significantly in UK. And so my prediction is Western European countries will shift towards a far right attitude. They will leave the European Union and their labor force will shrink, the amount of labor pool will shrink, and the GDP will drop, at least in the short run. I'm not sure what will happen in the long run, but in the short run, the GDP will drop. And another question comes, what happens to the Eastern European countries without this financial assistance funding and everything? Well, that's where we come back to the exports. So Eastern European countries, like I mentioned, their exports are focused on raw material products, and mostly their exports are focused on consumers in Asia that are consuming all these raw materials. And Eastern European countries are more oriented to the global South and the global East. Global East, the Eastern countries are, that's what I meant. And so then you have this bunch of Eastern European countries that are no longer behold to the wishes of the Western European countries. So if there's a war between US and China, they'll choose China because their export markets are in China, because the Eastern European countries are exporting mostly raw materials in Asia. And what happens to Russia in that case? Obviously, you can connect the dots very easily. Once the European Union dissolves, it's a win-win for Russia. These Eastern European countries, without the military and financial backing of the Western European countries, they'll have to make peace with Russia, and they'll have to get into Russia's sphere of influence and the Eastern world and the global South sphere of influence. And so I think that's what will happen. The Eastern European countries will go back to the Eastern world's sphere of influence. And for the Western European countries, really the future, whether they stay part of the European Union or they leave, their GDP will shrink significantly simply because of the dynamics of their country, because they have a matured economy. They're trying to negotiate with USA, which is their big consumer base, the luxury goods, fancy cars, and advanced equipments. That the big consumer base of those products is USA, and so you can't negotiate with USA on an equal footing when you're dependent on USA to that extent for your economy. And when these Western economic countries, Western European countries basically become independent, they'll have even less bargaining power because now they're negotiating as their own country and not as a union. And I think they'll come to a similar fate as UK has recently. They'll go through a serious economic decline. And then we come to the migrant issue. So then we come to the migrant issue, which is a major issue. So you have all these economic migrants that's coming from outside Europe that do not follow the cultural aspects of Europe, and they're vastly different cultures and beliefs than what the Europeans believe in. And so you're trying to integrate them into your society, but you're not. Most extent, they're basically living their own segregated lives. They're not integrated into your society. But when these Western European countries were part of the European Union, these economic migrants from outside Europe, they had human rights given to them by the European High Commission of Human Rights. And so when the European Union dissolved, this is very important because when the European Union dissolves and these Western European countries basically leave the European Human Rights Court, these out of Europe economic migrants that have already been living segregated lives in Western Europe, what will happen to them? They no longer have rights bestowed upon them by this European higher court. And you have all these far right fringe political parties coming to power in these Western European countries. So do they just leave? They work so hard to settle into those countries. Will they just leave or will they fight to the end? And I mean, you're seeing that, right? Ethnical, communal violence on the streets in the UK. And Nigel Farage has been talking about UK leaving the European Human Rights Court. And that's where the fundamental issue comes in, because once this European Human Rights Court dissolves, that's when all these economic migrants will either scramble to leave these European countries or they'll live a shadowy life. They'll get into crime, they'll stay under the radar to not get picked up by immigration agents. And I think that's the fundamental issue. And that's where the chaos will begin. Okay. And so, yeah, I see a lot of looting and burning, economic decline, and communal violence coming to Europe in the next decade. Especially once these Western European countries leave the European Union and once the European High Commission of Human Rights Court dissolves, that's it. The moment that happens and you have all these far right French political parties coming to power in Western Europe, you'll see violence on the streets. You'll see Western European cities getting burning down because these economic migrants, they're not gonna just back down without a fight. Okay, they came here, they sacrificed everything to come here. They're not just gonna get on a plane and leave. They'll basically go to a shift towards crime and the shadow black economy, and they'll turn to violence. That's usually what happens, and you've been seeing that in UK. And I think that I know it's a very gloomy picture, but I just don't see it ending any other way. I don't see the Western European countries growing their economies anytime soon. I don't see how this ends with anything other than communal violence. And it's very ironic because if you read Roman history, this is basically how the Roman Empire ended. So you have a bunch of barbarians trying to come into Rome. In the beginning, they didn't allow them, and then the Romans were like, "Ah, let's allow some of them to come into our country, so then they see how we live, and they'll not hate us so much." And before you know it, all the barbarians came in, and before you know it, Rome was on fire. And yeah, and then the capital of the Roman Empire shifted towards Constantinople in the east. Okay, there's a hint right there. Whenever the Western world collapsed, the people didn't just disappear, the system didn't just disappear, it just moved to the east. And so there's a hint for you. And yeah, I think that communal violence, decline of these Western empires, Western European economies is the near-term future. I mean, Trump is not going to help it. He's going to probably even put fuel to the fire, and I don't blame him. Okay, European countries have been, piggy banking on, uh, US's military spending basically, and so I don't blame him either. But yeah, if you have money in Western European countries, take it out in the next few years because the moment these Western European countries leave the European Union and thus they leave the European Human Rights Commission, that's when communal violence will begin on the streets of Europe. Because these economic migrants from outside Europe, they're not just going to leave peacefully. That's not how anything works. And yeah, in terms of the Eastern European countries, I believe that their future lies to the global south and the Eastern world, and they have more in common with Russia than they do with these Western European countries. And so, yeah, the USA and the Western European countries are trying to pick a fight between the brothers of the Eastern European countries and Russia. But I've met so many people from the Eastern Europe and from Russia, and they tell me, hey, I have a cousin in Latvia, I have a brother in Ukraine, and all that. So they're more connected by blood than most people think, and their future belongs with Russia and China and the global South, and they'll be fine. They'll get cut off from the financial assistance from the Western Europe in the short run, but look, euro is not backed by any gold standard. It's they're printing money like there's no tomorrow. So is it a bad thing that you get cut off from this toilet paper money that's not backed by any gold standard? In the long run, no. Maybe in the short run it is, but in the long run, I think the Eastern European countries will fare well. And yeah, I think that's what the future of European Union holds. I don't think it will last very long. And I think the stick that will break the camel's back will be the election of far right parties in Western Europe. And it's going to be basically a race to the bottom. So once one of the major Western European countries leave, like France or Spain or Germany, I believe Germany might leave before France. I think the far right party in Germany is much bigger than what most people think. And yeah, Marine Le Pen might come to. I think Macron might be able to squeeze in another term. He's very smart. But I think the far right party in Germany is much stronger than what most people think. It's not popular, obviously, because of Nazism and Hitler and all that. They want to keep a low profile. But I think the far right party in Germany will come to power in the next election and they'll basically take Germany out of the European Union. And then it'll be a slippery slope race to the bottom. All the other Western European countries will want to leave before they get wrecked. And once that happens, the Western Eastern European countries will basically leave. I mean, there's no European Union without the Western European money. And I think that's what the future looks like. And so, yeah, if you think otherwise, please write a comment. But I believe that the European Union was a nice experiment while it lasted, but it's not going to last for the same reason most unions don't last, which is the unequal, which is the inequality between the lives of two groups of people, in this case, Western Europeans and Eastern Europeans. The lives and the ideologies and the perspectives of Western Europeans and Eastern Europeans are so fundamentally different, and the economic balance sheets are so fundamentally different. It don't last. It doesn't work. That kind of union doesn't work. But yeah, it was a good project. It was a good project while it lasted. And if you're trying to make money off it, obviously, in the short run, you'll see the bond market, the interest rates on the bond market in Western European countries will rally, right? You'll see that in the short run, I think, like you saw in UK. So If you guys have been following what happened in UK since Brexit, the interest rates went up massively. And yeah, so the Eastern Western European countries, where once each of them leaves the European Union, they'll have to hike up their bond interest rates. And yeah, the reason being inflationary factors. When you have a lower labor pool to choose from because you're no longer part of the European Union, the wage increases. You have a smaller supply of labor, wage will increase. Wage increase will bring inflationary pressure. That will put pressure to increase the interest rate on the bonds of these Western European countries. And so, yeah, if you're trying to make money, you can bet on that. When the interest rate on the bonds increase for Western European countries, the bonds currently in the market, they'll lose their coupon value, right? Because the new bonds with high yields will be more attractive. And yeah, that's one way to position your bet. And if you're trying to make money from the Eastern European countries, I mean, they have very good growth rates. So their bond market will also see changes because their bond markets will no longer be financed by the Western European countries. So it will be financed more and more by China, Global South, Russia maybe, and Eastern European countries might decide to integrate themselves into the BRICS alliance. And yeah, once they decide to integrate themselves into the BRICS alliance, then we'll see what happens. But it's harder to predict how the bond market in Eastern European countries will pan out without the financial assistance of Western European countries. But yeah, I'll keep a watch on this. If you guys have any comments, you can make it. And yeah, that's it from today. I'll see you guys in the next video.